my fabulous fourth graders. Today we are going to read chapter 27 in The People of Sparks. It is called Firelight. Let's just remember that yesterday we left off at the end of chapter 26, and Dune had just rescued Torin from a tree that was burning. This was the result of the People of Sparks and the People of Ember beginning their fight against each other. So yesterday we learned what was happening from Dune's perspective, and today in chapter 7 we are going to learn what's happening from Lena's perspective. Lena was on the side of the plaza farthest from the river when Tick called out his demands, and Dune yelled, "At least listen." When she heard his voice, she tried to make her way toward him, but the crowd was so dense and turbulent that she couldn't get through. Tick's warriors were everywhere. So I just want to stop for a second before I continue reading to make sure that we all understand that we are now learning what happened yesterday from Lena's perspective. We're not exactly leaving off from the time Dune rescued Torin from the tree. Now we're going back to the beginning of the fight, but we're learning it from Lena's perspective. So it's really important to understand that as readers. The sun flashed off their steel rods and pipes and jagged pieces of glass. She was worming her way among the dozens of shoving and shouting people when Ben fired the weapon. She heard the sound, a chain of loud pops, and the people in front of her screamed and scrambled backward. Lena ducked and put her hands over her head. She stayed that way as people pressed past her and stumbled over her, and in a moment the popping noise stopped. Then there was a bang and more shouts, and when she dared to stand up and look, she saw that the pine tree was on fire. The flames were small at first, creeping along just one branch with sudden flashes as dry bunches of pine needles caught fire. But in seconds, the flames grew bigger. They leapt and crackled. Black smoke rose in a pillar into the air. The crowd pressed backward, crashing against each other. The people of Ember, for whom fire was a rare and terrible danger, stared upward with their eyes wide and their mouths gaping. Some of them screamed. Some were too frightened to make a sound. Such a terror came over Lena that she couldn't move, except to stagger a few feet back along with the crowd. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, the terrible orange hands reaching up into the branches of the tree. A voice in her mind screamed, "Run, run!" but she couldn't run. Her legs wouldn't work. It was all they could do just to hold her up. A voice cried out, "Someone's in the tree," and Lena looked up through the smoke just long enough to see the upper branches thrashing and get a glimpse of something white moving among them. Then she was surrounded again by struggling people. She tripped over a piece of pipe rolling on the pavement and fell to her knees. When she managed to get to her feet again, the mass of people had pressed back behind her, and she found herself near the front of the crowd. On the steps of the town hall, she saw Ben lying motionless, sprawled on his back. Wilmer bent over him, and Mary Waters shouted, "Fire truck, fire truck." The fire had leapt from the pine tree to the town hall tower. Flames licked up its wall. That was when Lena heard a wild laugh from behind her. "Let it burn," someone cried. "Let it burn. It's their punishment. They deserve it." She recognized the voice. It was Tick. Others took up the cry. "Let it burn," they shouted, and a chorus of voices raised a harsh, triumphant cheer. The people of Ember were packed together at the far south end of the plaza now, as far from the town hall and the fire as they could get. A few ran into the streets to get away, but most of them waited to see what was going to happen. They stayed at a safe distance, hovering between terror and fascination, and watched as the flames streaked up the sides of the tower. The people of Sparks were running in all directions. Shopkeepers grabbed buckets and ran to the river and filled them with water, but most of the fire was high above their heads, impossible to reach. They flung the water into the air and then stood with empty buckets, watching the tower burn. The 2 fire trucks arrived, their drivers standing up and lashing the oxen to make them trot. Water sloshed from the big barrels on the trucks' beds. As soon as the trucks stopped, people jumped up onto them, grabbed buckets, and began dipping buckets in the water. "Fire line, fire line," the cry went up, and the villagers, who must have practiced this many times, formed straggling lines stretching out to the fire from the truck at the edge of the plaza. Burning twigs broke from the pine tree and blew in the wind, and new fires started up here and there. The people in the fire lines flung water in all directions, but for the few flames each bucket of water doused, it seemed 10 new ones sprang up. Lena's heart was beating so hard it drowned out all her thoughts. She wanted to run, to get away from here, but something paralyzed her. Part of it was fear of the fire. Part was fear of something else, fear of an idea that was trying to come to the surface of her mind. She didn't want to hear it. Pay attention, a voice whispered to her. She tried to push it away. So, boys and girls, that paragraph was another example that shows that Lena feels helpless. So she was helpless when she arrived home to the village of Sparks to learn about the conflict that had become worse between the people of Ember and the people of Sparks. And now again, now that the fighting has started, she feels hopeless. And in the way that the author described her fear, I feel like she feels even more helpless now than she did when she arrived home only to learn about the conflict, because now she's helpless and she feels fear. She's really scared, but she doesn't know what to do. She's paralyzed, which means that she can't move, she can't run, she can't think. She's just full of fear. Faster and faster, the people on the truck dipped the buckets into the barrels, dipped, filled, and handed the buckets to those in line, who passed them along from hand to hand. The last person in line, the one standing nearest the flames, flung the water, which hissed and steamed and put out a few flames. Tick and his warriors, along with the rest of the people of Ember, watched all this as if it were a frightening but fascinating show. Tick and a few others cheered, but most people just gazed goggle-eyed as the flames blackened the town hall. When the wind blew sparks toward them, they shrieked and pressed back farther. Lena scanned the crowd. Where was Doone? Where was Mrs. Murdo? She didn't see either of them. She could hardly see anything. Boys and girls, we know where Doone is because yesterday we learned what was happening from Doone's perspective. We know he's up in the tower in the town hall, and we know that he's going to rescue Torrin. Smoke filled the air. All she could see was a shadowy tumult of people. Only the flames were bright. The pine tree was a column of fire. Within it, Lena could see the tree's black skeleton. When a great branch broke off and fell, crashing into the shrubbery below and getting it alight, a terrified clamor arose from the people of Ember, and now instead of pressing backward, many of them turned and ran. Lena stayed where she was. She felt as if she were being gripped by two huge hands. One pulled her backward, away from the fire, back toward the streets of the town, through which she could run to safety. The other pulled her forward into danger, urging her to do what she suddenly knew was right. It was the good thing. It was what she'd been waiting for. But she didn't want to do it. I can't, she thought. I don't want to. I'm too afraid. Someone else will do it, not me. Not me. I can't. So remember, boys and girls, when Lena came home and was talking to Doone about what was happening between the people of Ember and the people of Sparks, Lena shared with Doone that she learned from Maddie that doing good deeds could help solve the conflict between two groups of people. So Lena learned that no matter what another person is doing to you, you could still do a good deed back to them. And in time, this would stop the conflict. The reason why Lena felt helpless was because the conflict had already gotten really bad between the people of Sparks and the people of Ember. She feels helpless because she doesn't think that the good deeds would help at this point because the problem has already gotten past that. But now Lena is thinking in her mind, this is the time. I can do a good deed right now. But she's still paralyzed with fear. At that moment, the tower collapsed. Its walls crumbled, the roof caved in, and flames shot up from the hole. The flagpole came hurtling down like a spear. The blackened walls leaned and toppled, and then the fire was everywhere. Flaming branches and tufts of needles, blown by the wind, landed in the dry grass at the edge of the plaza, and in the trees by the river, and on the thatched roofs of the market stalls. There, cried the people in the bucket line, pointing. There, and over there. The lines twisted around. The buckets traveled faster and faster from hand to hand, and those at the front of the lines tossed the water this way and that. But there were too many fires, and not enough people to keep up with them. It's now, thought Lena. I have to do it. I will do it. Quickly then, before she could change her mind, she ran. She ran with a hammering heart, with her head down and her hands in fists. She ran as if fighting a powerful wind, out across the plaza by herself. And when she reached the nearest bucket line, she pushed her way in. Traitor! Shrieked a voice behind her. It was Tick's voice. That voice like a cutting blade. Lena heard it, but she paid no attention. Traitor! Traitor! Tick cried again, and his warriors echoed him. Traitor! They yelled, jumping backward when the sparks flew too close. Boys and girls, I just love Lena. She's one of my favorite characters in all of the books that we've read together, and even in the books that I've read, because she is only 12 years old, yet she cares so much about other people, and she always tries her best to do the right thing. So now she has her own people, including Tick, who has become a leader of the people of Ember that people really look up to and respect. She's even continued to do the right thing with Tick yelling traitor. A traitor is someone who goes against their own group and joins another side. Although we know as readers that Lena's not a traitor. She's just doing the right thing. She still cares about the people of Ember. She wants to be on their side, but she knows that if this conflict continues and if the fire continues to spread, it's not going to be good for either side. Doon got out of the tower just in time. So now we know from that first sentence that we're back to Doon's point of view. He'd had to almost throw Torin down the stairs and then take them 3 at a time himself. Torin ran off somewhere as soon as he went out the back door, but Doon dashed around to the plaza, staying close to the market stalls, and joined the crush of Ember teas at the south end. Panting, he stared back at the ruin he had escaped from. The black spine of the pine tree, the smoldering boards of the town hall. He watched as the flames consumed the building and the tower collapsed. He saw the fire lines snaking among the scattered blazes, and he heard Tick's laugh ringing out over the clamor. Burn, burn, yelled Tick, and other voices chimed in with his. Let it burn, serves them right. For a moment, Doon stood there, stunned, his mind a blank. It seemed that war surged around him, but not the war he had imagined. Where did he belong in this battle? Who was his enemy? Where were his friends? Noise and confusion assailed him. His eyes stung. His legs were shaking. And then he saw Lena break away from the crowd and run across the plaza. He heard Tick and his warriors screaming, traitor, and he felt as if suddenly his eyes had opened, though they hadn't been closed, and he had awakened from a bad dream. The air around him seemed to become clear. Strength returned to his legs. He edged between the people in front of him, burst out of the crowd, and ran the same direction as Lena toward the fire lines. And seeing what Lena and Doon had done, others followed. Clary pushed through the crowd and ran forward, and Mrs. Murda went after her, taking long, quick strides and holding up her skirts. Then came the Hoover sisters, and Doon's father, and fragile Miss Thorne, and 5 more people, and 3 more after that. They ran with their hands before their mouths or their arms over their heads, shielding themselves from smoke and falling embers, and they added themselves to the bucket brigade and began hauling water. More and more of the people of Ember followed. At last, the only ones not fighting the fire were Tick and a few of his men. Wearing half-stubborn, half-frightened expressions, they clustered at the far end of the plaza, shouting traitors now and then, with their useless weapons dangling from their hands. So today in your ongoing reading document, you guys are going to go back to thinking about theme. Only now we're going to think of the next part of the progression, which I'll read to you. So in the middle part of the progression, I know it's hard to see, so I'm looking right here at this middle checkbox. I provided details from across the text that supported that theme. So you guys have been doing such a great job identifying the big ideas or the themes in your stories, and you've been doing a really good job supporting it with evidence from what you've just read. So today, we want to think about one of those big themes. It could be a new idea you're thinking about your Just Right book, or it could be a theme you've already jotted about. Only this time you want to think about how that theme was evident throughout the whole story, across that whole story arc. And I'm going to give you an example right now. So the first thing that we do as fourth graders when we write about theme is I wrote about a theme that comes through across most of the story. That's the first part in our theme learning progression. The second part, which is what I just read to you, I provided details from across the text that support that theme. And then the last part of our theme learning progression at level 4, I explained how those parts from across the story show this theme. So I'm going to think about what I just read, and I'm going to use Lena because she's the character I've been focusing on in all of my character theories and in my perspective stop and jots. So I'm going to say the theme first. So remember, the theme should be a big idea that could apply to many different texts. After you write that initial theme statement, you use plot details and character names to support how it's a theme from the book you're writing about. So I'm going to start by saying that sometimes in life, you have to break away from the crowd. For example, in the text, Lena does not follow the crowd. She does not do what other people are doing. She breaks away from that and does what she thinks is right and what she thinks is important. So now that I have my example, my general example, I'm going to get more specific and talk about how that theme, sometimes in life it's important to break away from the crowd, is present in the beginning of the text and then now toward the end. And I will type this and put it in the lesson plan for you, so you have an example to read as well. So in the beginning, Lena feels like her people in the village of Sparks need a better place to live. She decides to break away from the crowd and go with Maddie and Casper to explore the unknown regions with the hope of finding a city where her people can live. On that journey, she learns that the city she had in mind was not what she thought, but she does learn important advice from Maddie about how doing good things can resolve conflict or prevent conflict from getting worse. In the end of the book, Lena does not fight with her people of Ember. She breaks away from the crowd. She runs away from Tick, who has become a leader of Ember, and decides to help put out the fire because it's the right thing to do. As a result, the rest of the people of Ember, or most of the people of Ember, I should say, also decide to break away from the crowd and do the right thing, which is to help put out the fire. So notice how I know it's hard to see, this is in the lesson plan. I wrote about a theme that comes through across most of the story. So that theme is sometimes in life it's important to break away from the crowd. Now, my second part, I provided details from across the text that support that theme. So I talked about what Lena did in the beginning and then what Lena did in the end. And then I explained how those parts from across the story show this theme. So in both of my examples, Lena took action and independently on her own tried to do something that was right. Instead of staying in the village of Sparks, she decided to take action and go on a journey to find a place for her people to live. And then in the end, instead of staying back with Tick and the rest of the people of Ember and chanting, let it burn, she runs away from them and decides to help put out the fire because it's the right thing to do. So today you're going to use this theme progression, which is in the lesson plan, to write a theme statement that you think is evident or present throughout the whole story, across the whole arc of the story. And like I said, you can use a theme statement that you've already jotted about. You can go back through your stop and jots and you can pick a theme statement that you've already identified from your book, but then make sure that your evidence to support it comes across the whole story, not just one example, but multiple examples. And we will read chapter 28 tomorrow.